Welcome to the podcast of the Political Page blog with commentary from an attorney and entrepreneur on the political and social issues of the day, from a rationalist, libertarian, and often irreverent perspective. This is Political Page, and here's what's on my mind today. Hello, and welcome to the podcast of the Political Page blog. This one's dated the 29th of July, 2019, and it's entitled, A Blind Loyalty to the Constitution is No Sin. Now, the Trump tweet du jour is the news that the Director of National Intelligence, a guy named Dan Coats, is resigning. And granted, it is really not unusual for somebody in a high-pressure position like that to change over right around the 2-3 year point of an administration. It's been under discussion for some time that Coats is probably on his way out. They've been talking about, who's going to replace him? A bunch of names are being bandied about. And one of those names, kind of tangentially, has been Representative John Ratcliffe. And it's true, although he has been mentioned, he's not been one of the prime candidates. So it is widely assumed, at least by the leftist press and the dyspeptically petulant Chuck Schumer, that the final selection of Ratcliffe for this position arises from his stellar performance at the Mueller hearings last week. And for those of you who were blessedly missing that exercise in senile dementia, the career prosecutor Ratcliffe schooled the Democrats. He schooled Robert Mueller, and hopefully he schooled a substantial chunk of the woefully ignorant progressive America on the fundamental principle of our national jurisprudence that we are innocent until we are proven guilty, and absent that proof, we remain innocent. There are two takeaway quotes that Ratcliffe said during that hearing. You can get them on YouTube. They're really good. The first is this: by requiring Donald Trump to prove his innocence, they are depriving him of one thing no one can be deprived of, which is the presumption of innocence, followed by, Donald Trump is not above the law, but he damn sure shouldn't be below the law, which is where Volume 2 of the Mueller report puts him. And he's quite correct, of course. And it was about time, God, amid all the posturing and preening and pandering and pumping of the amoral progressive toadies on the dais, that somebody said that. You know, the insistence by Robert Mueller, well, let's be honest, who ever really wrote his investigative report, because clearly Mueller hadn't the slightest freaking clue what it says, that insistence that a prosecutor has a right to just declare a subject not exonerated, that is the most foul, dangerous, execrable abrogation of our constitutional rights that I've ever seen in a 35-year legal career. Soviet Russia and Mao's China investigate political rivals and presume guilt until they're exonerated, which of course they never are. We don't do that here. Or at least we didn't do that, until a deadly combination of thwarted, progressive toddlers in a tantrum and the bureaucratic deep state found themselves outmaneuvered by a stubborn American electorate, and they acted out with a soft coup against the United States presidency. And so Ratcliffe correctly excoriated Mueller and his investigation for turning American jurisprudence dangerously on its head, and he rejected that pathetic excuse from Mueller that somehow the investigation of this particular citizen, Donald Trump, was, quote, unique and therefore undeserving of all the basic constitutional protections we afford every other citizen of the Republic. You know, one might consider that position that Ratcliffe took loyalty to Trump. But if one really listens to what Ratcliffe said, he wasn't showing loyalty to Trump. He was showing loyalty to the United States Constitution. And, honey, that's a good thing. Now, whether Trump perceives that loyalty as being to principle or to himself is something one would have to ask Trump, right? But that said, the stampede to attribute the nomination of John Ratcliffe to this puerile reward for his performance on the stage is beyond a disservice to him as a nominee. You know, like most of the talking points that are repeated ad nauseum by the left and loyally parroted by the mainstream media megalith, there is a kernel of truth in there, but it's buried amid this mass of petulant spin. And the current marching orders, you're going to hear this all over the place. The current marching orders to multiple outlets on the left consists of twin statements. Coats spoke truth to power, and Ratcliffe shows blind loyalty to Trump. And I'll tell you what, you want a great drinking game idea? Every time you hear one of those phrases this week, take a shot. Sobriety is overrated. The kernel of truth in all of this is that Trump, as was anyone who listened to that hearing, was reportedly pleasantly surprised, probably impressed with the questioning of Ratcliffe at the hearing. I mean, make no mistake about it, Ratcliffe was sharp. And by sharp, I mean he was keen, he was tenacious, he was serious, his comments were substantive, and overall, I'll tell you, he presented such a stark contrast to the sullen, vapid, shallow, posturing Democrats on his committee. But Ratcliffe is hardly an empty talking head in the slavish service of the bad orange man with nothing else to recommend him. Okay, you want to know who Ratcliffe is? Here's who he is. He graduated Notre Dame on a scholarship. He went to Southern Methodist University for his Juris Doctor degree. Then he went into private legal practice for, about 5 years or so, before becoming the United States Attorney for the Eastern District of Texas. He spent 5 years as the Chief of Anti-Terrorism and National Security for the Eastern District of Texas before he was elected to Congress back about 2007, I guess 12 years ago. That's when he got even more involved in national security. Listen to a list of the committees where he serves in the House. All concurrently, often as either the chair when we're in the majority or the ranking member when we're not. It reads like a freaking primer on anti-terrorism. Here they are: Ethics, Judiciary, the Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, the Subcommittee on Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Protection, the Subcommittee on Crime, Terrorism, and Homeland Security, and the Subcommittee on Maritime Security, among others. He's a member of the Association of Defense Community Caucus, the Military Depot Caucus, and the Attorney General's Advisory Committee on Terrorism and National Security. In his spare time, I'm sure he reads Tom Clancy novels, but you get the idea. This is no national security lightweight. Hold your breath waiting for that little detail to percolate up from the muck of the national media, right? Which brings us back to the scurrilous talking points now being spewed across the Twitterverse and the 24/7 Trump derangement outlets, that Ratcliffe is an inexperienced Trump toady being put into the place of the noble speak truth to power icon Dan Coats. Now listen, I got nothing against Coats. To all reports, he's a decent guy. He's a longtime bureaucrat. He demonstrates only a tepid loyalty to the executive, and that's rather the point. Look, the intelligence community in the United States is part of the executive branch. It is not an independent branch of government. Were it an independent branch, it would have checks and balances on it. But like the rest of the megalithic bureaucracy, there is no check, there is no balance except for the fact that they work for one of the branches, and in this case, the executive. Intelligence personnel answer to the president. They're tasked to carry out the policies of that executive. For God's sake, people, that's the mechanism by which the intelligence services remain subject to the will of the American people. We pick the executive, he picks the policies, the bureaucracy applies them. And the bureaucracy, especially one as powerful as the United States Intelligence Services, that says it's independent of the executive, is a very bad thing, because then they are not answerable to the executive or, as voters, to us. There's the rub. The Democrats are now screaming that Coats was independent of any oversight by his boss. Ratcliffe may not be. Well, let's hope to God he isn't. Haven't we had enough of rogue deep state operations in this country? You know, the 2016 attempt by high officials in the Obama administration to engage the massively powerful spy apparatus of the U.S. for political purposes should be anything but acceptable to us as the American people. We do not allow political manipulation of law enforcement. We don't spy on our citizens, even if their name is Trump. And listen, if the CIA or the NSA were involved in the corruption of the FISA court that resulted in that spying, and I'll tell you, judging by the recent comments of Attorney General Barr, they were indeed involved, the Director of National Intelligence is squarely in control of the disclosure of evidence of that wrongdoing. So, what's the problem with Coats being in charge of that? Well, it's true. He was not appointed until January 2017. He wasn't there during the malfeasance of 2016. But his own vaunted, what he calls, independence from the dictates of the executive branch, which includes the Inspector General and the Department of Justice, becomes problematic. National intelligence is not independent from the DOJ. It is subject to it. And this culture of secrecy and the close grasp on power endemic in the intelligence agencies, that's what's encouraged the individuals that were in it to engage in the covert undermining of a presidential election. And it's also the very same culture that encourages them to stonewall the investigation of that wrongdoing. And indeed, that fear swiftly became a reality, because as soon as A.G. Barr and his lead investigator, John Durham, attempted to obtain information from the intelligence services earlier this summer, the answers they received were what A.G. Barr calls not at all satisfactory. You had Coats out there almost immediately claiming a right to unilaterally gainsay the decisions of the president as to what to declassify and share with the DOJ. Look, he's a long-time government cog. He has little love for his current boss. He's got a lifetime of involvement with the intelligence bureaucracy. He has very little impetus whatsoever to cooperate with an investigation that's about to ferret out malfeasance among his subordinates and disclose massive corruption of his intelligence service. That malfeasance has to be exposed before it can be excised. He's not the person to put in charge of overseeing that. And the only thing that is going to restore the confidence of a large portion, I'll tell you, of the American public in the integrity of our intelligence services is new leadership. Leadership that is unflinchingly dedicated, not to the bureaucracy, but to the bedrock principles of the United States Constitution. And listening to John Ratcliffe at that Mueller hearing, there can be no doubt he's loyal. And yes, in the words of nasty little Chuck Schumer, blindly loyal to those principles, not to Trump, but to the principles of the Constitution. And that just may restore some faith in our republic. Thank you for tuning in to the Political Page podcast today. Original blog articles, complete with a lot more information and great links to original source material, can be found anytime on politicalpage.net. That's political, P-A-I-G-E.net.